I didn't realize the car behind me had no headlights until it was close enough for me to hear it whisper. The thought arrived fully formed, neat and declarative, as if I were already telling the story afterward. Even then, some distant part of me found that strange. How the mind reaches for narrative when it senses danger, how it starts arranging moments into something survivable. The highway was empty in every direction, a narrow ribbon of asphalt threading through pine forest and fog. Midnight had pared the world down to essentials. Road, trees, the pale cone of my own headlights. Frost filmed the edges of the windshield. The heater clicked inside, breathing out air that smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. I had been driving for hours. The radio had given up miles back, collapsing into static and then silence. My phone had lost service even earlier. There was a town on the map, a small one, a dot with a name that sounded like a verb, but it refused to arrive. Mile markers slipped past like gravestones. I noticed the car because of the sound first. Not an engine, not tires. A whisper. At first I thought it was fatigue inventing things. Long drives do that. The steady hush of the road had settled into a trance, and beneath it there was another layer, a soft susurration that rose and fell like breath. I blinked hard and checked the rearview mirror. There it was, a shape in the dark, keeping pace just behind me. No headlights, no reflected glare, just a low silhouette, darker than the dark around it, as if someone had cut the outline of a car from the night and left the whole moving. My stomach tightened. I flipped the mirror to its dim setting, then back again. The shape stayed perfectly centered. It didn't close the distance. It didn't fall back. It simply matched my speed, a quiet companion on a road that suddenly felt too narrow. I told myself it was an older model with burnt-out lamps. I told myself people forget to turn their lights on all the time. The whisper brushed the inside of my ears. It wasn't a single voice. It was layered, like wind through reeds, like leaves sliding over one another. Sometimes it rose to the edge of intelligibility. Sometimes it receded until I wondered if it had ever been there. I cracked my window an inch. Cold air spilled in. The whisper grew clearer. It wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from behind me. My pulse found a new rhythm. I pressed the accelerator. The speedometer climbed. The car without headlights stayed exactly where it was. I tried the brake. Red tail light glow washed the road, but the shape neither slowed nor surged forward. It held its place with impossible precision. The forest closed in. Pines leaned toward the road, their branches knitting together overhead. Fog gathered in shallow drifts along the shoulders, sliding across the asphalt in slow, deliberate movements. The whisper threaded itself through my thoughts. I turned the radio back on. Static roared, faded, roared again. For a moment I thought I heard music. Then the whisper surfaced over it, patient and intimate. I shut the radio off. A sign loomed out of the fog. Last services 5 miles. Beneath it, someone had scrawled something in black paint. I caught only a fragment. Don't. My GPS blinked awake and told me to continue for 3 miles. The whisper had changed. It had acquired cadence. The air inside the car felt heavier. My ears popped. I could feel the presence behind me in my teeth. I tried my phone. No service. I laughed once. The road curved, and my headlights swept across a stand of birches, their pale trunks gleaming like bones. For a heartbeat, the fog parted, and I saw the car more clearly. It did not have windows. Where glass should have been, there was only shadow. The body looked unfinished, edges soft, details smeared. The tires did not quite touch the road. There was no license plate, no emblem, just the suggestion of a vehicle, as if something had been told what a car was and attempted an imitation. The whisper swelled, carrying the smell of wet earth and rust. A memory surfaced. My grandmother's voice when she told stories about old roads and older rules. She said there were sounds you didn't answer, and travelers you didn't invite into your life. Sometimes, she had said, they wear shapes we understand, makes it easier to come close. The GPS chimed. Turn right ahead. There was no right turn. The map flickered, then drew a route into a road that did not exist. The whisper began to resolve into words, not any language I knew, but the shape of language. Beneath it all, pressure built the way the air changes before a storm. I forced myself to breathe. I drove faster. Fog thickened. The road dipped and rose like the back of something enormous. Ahead, a bridge crossed a narrow river. As I approached, my headlights caught a deer in the ditch. Throat opened with surgical precision. Steam rose faintly from exposed muscle. The whisper took on a note of satisfaction. Understanding arrived all at once. Whatever followed me did not belong to roads. It belonged to thresholds. It had chosen this shape because I was alone and moving, because vehicles are promises of distance, because headlights are eyes, engines are hearts, and mirrors are invitations. I swerved onto the bridge. Concrete hummed beneath my tires. The whisper rose to a chorus. Halfway across, my car shuddered. Every warning light flared. The engine died. The steering wheel went slack. Behind me, the shape drew closer for the first time. It did not accelerate. It simply shortened the space between us, like a thought completing itself. I saw into it then, not with my eyes. It was full of motion without bodies, full of overlapping silhouettes, full of mouths that were not mouths opening and closing together. The whisper was not sound at all, but friction. Many intentions brushing against the narrow corridor of my attention. It wanted permission. It wanted me to notice it fully. The bridge rail flashed past inches from my door. The river yawned below. I remembered my grandmother leaving bread on the back step during storms. I remembered her saying that names were doors, and listening was a kind of opening. I did not look back. Instead, I switched on my high beams. White light poured into the fog. It did not illuminate the shape so much as outline it, carving its wrongness into relief. For a split second, the whisper faltered. I took my foot off the brake and let gravity pull me forward. The car rolled, engine dead, across the rest of the bridge. The whisper surged, then thinned as concrete ended and asphalt began. The shape hesitated at the threshold, its edges wavering. Then it peeled away from the road. Not left, not right. It sank downward, dissolving into the river's reflection like ink in water, taking its chorus with it. My car coasted to a stop. For a long time, I sat there listening to my heartbeat while fog drifted past in pale sheets. Eventually, the engine turned over. Eventually, I drove on. I reached the town just before dawn. I filled my tank. I drank coffee that tasted like burnt earth. I watched the sky lighten. Weeks later, a mechanic found nothing wrong with my car. Sometimes, when traffic stacks up and I'm boxed in on all sides, I feel that same pressure in my ears. Sometimes, in low places where sound carries strangely, I catch a hint of cadence beneath engines and horns. I keep my mirrors adjusted. I don't answer when something calls from behind. And when I drive that stretch of highway again, I keep my headlights on. Not because I'm afraid of what I might see, but because I know now what sees by listening, and how easily a whisper can become an invitation. The next green highway sign flickered, revealing a different message every time my headlights hit it. At first, I thought it was just the fog. The night had that hollow quality to it, the kind that flattens sound and swallows distance. My beams tunneled through drifting white, illuminating only a few yards of asphalt at a time. The forest on either side leaned inward, tall pines knitting together above the road like clasped fingers. Somewhere far off, wind moved through branches with a sound like slow breathing. I blinked, rolled my shoulders, and kept driving. The sign stood on the right shoulder, bolted to two metal poles. Standard issue, reflective green, white block letters. As I passed it, the message shifted. Welcome to River County. A normal greeting, harmless. Then my headlights slid past, and in the brief moment before darkness reclaimed it, the words rearranged themselves. Slow down. My foot lifted instinctively from the accelerator. Okay, I murmured to no one. Fatigue did strange things to perception. I'd been on the road since late afternoon, chasing a destination that kept moving farther away on my GPS. The last town I'd driven through had closed itself up early, storefronts dark, diner empty, Gas station unattended except for a single pump humming to itself. I should have stopped there. I told myself that now. The road stretched on, a pale ribbon unwinding through trees and fog. A mile later, another sign appeared. Same shape, same poles, same shade of institutional green. This time it read, "Next services 12 miles." Relief loosened something in my chest. Then my headlights swept fully across it. "You missed your turn." I checked my mirrors. Empty. I glanced at the dashboard map. The blue route line wavered, then steadied, insisting I was exactly where I should be. "That's not funny," I said, my voice too loud inside the car. The heater whispered warm air against my legs. The vents smelled faintly of dust and old leaves. My coffee had gone cold in the cup holder, a thin skin forming across its surface. I drove on. The fog thickened, gathering in slow folds along the shoulders, spilling across the asphalt like something curious. The trees grew denser. Mile markers slipped by, their numbers increasingly erratic, 117, then 113, then 119 again. The third sign rose out of the mist without warning. Reduce speed in poor visibility. Sensibly worded. Practical. Then the letters crawled. "We can see you blink." My hands tightened on the wheel. The road noise changed, becoming softer, as if the tires were no longer fully touching pavement. My ears popped. Pressure settled behind my eyes. I became acutely aware of my own breathing, the way my ribs expanded and contracted, the small, wet sounds inside my mouth. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself signs didn't do that. Still, I didn't blink as I passed. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, then went dark. The radio offered only static. Even that faded after a few seconds, leaving the car suspended in a thick, padded quiet. I began to feel observed, not watched in the way people watch with eyes and intention, but in a broader sense, like being held inside something's awareness. The sensation didn't come from any one direction, pressed in from everywhere at once. Another sign waited around a gentle curve. "Drive safely." The letters shimmered, rearranged. "Your heart is too fast." I swallowed. I forced myself to slow my breathing, counting the seconds in and out. The forest seemed to lean closer. The fog curled along the hood, tracing invisible paths. A memory surfaced, uninvited. My mother teaching me how to drive, her hands hovering inches from the wheel, her voice calm as she explained blind spots and stopping distances. She told me that roads were stories, that every mile carried echoes of everyone who had ever passed through. At the time, I'd laughed. The next sign appeared barely half a mile later. "Deer crossing." Then, "Turn around." My GPS recalculated with a soft chime, drawing a new route that looped backward in a lazy spiral. "There's nowhere to turn around," I whispered. The road had narrowed. The shoulders were swallowed by undergrowth. The trees stood close enough now that their shadows overlapped, forming dark lattices across the asphalt. I drove faster. The fog broke just long enough for my headlights to catch something in the ditch. A wrecked sedan, half consumed by vines and moss, its windows blown out, its interior filled with leaves. The air carried a faint metallic tang. The next sign waited immediately after. "Accident ahead." "No, you were here before." My stomach dropped. Images rose behind my eyes. The abandoned car, the looping mile markers, the way the GPS kept insisting I was on course. A realization began to assemble itself, slow and reluctant. I didn't remember starting this drive. I remembered packing a bag, locking my apartment, sending a text that never delivered. But the moment I turned onto this highway felt strangely absent, like a skipped chapter. The sign that followed was smaller, its reflective coating peeling. "Rest area 2 miles. Then, you don't like being alone." The whisper of the heater sounded suddenly like breath. The trees creaked, their trunks shifting subtly, as though adjusting their stance. I tried to recall the last human voice I'd heard. Felt distant, abstract. My headlights swept across another sign, and this one didn't wait for me to pass. "Welcome back." The words rearranged themselves in place. We've been keeping time for you. The pressure in my ears spiked. The road ahead warped, its edges bending inward. For a moment, I could see multiple versions of it at once, overlapping paths branching into fog. I slowed to a crawl. "What do you want?" I asked. The forest offered no answer. The next sign was close enough that I could see the scratches in its paint, the dents from old impacts. "Bridge ahead." Then, "This is where you stop listening." The bridge emerged from the mist, a simple concrete span over a narrow, black river. No guardrails. The water below moved without sound, reflecting only darkness. My car shuddered as I rolled onto it. Warning lights flared across the dashboard. The engine coughed, then fell silent. Momentum carried me halfway across before I coasted to a stop, directly beside the final sign. Its surface rippled like disturbed water. "Not all guides lead forward." The letters rearranged one last time. "We are not warning you. We are reminding you." Understanding arrived with the weight of gravity. The signs weren't directing traffic. They were marking progress. Each message wasn't advice. It was confirmation. They were checkpoints tracking how close I was to remembering. The forest, the fog, the looping miles, they weren't obstacles. They were containment. I thought of the wrecked sedan in the ditch. I thought of the way the GPS never truly recalculated, only pretended to. I thought of how familiar the curves of the road had begun to feel. The sign's surface cleared, revealing a final line. "You agreed to stay until you were ready." The river below reflected my headlights back at me, bright and unwavering, like a pair of open eyes. I understood then what the watching presence was. It wasn't outside. It was the road itself, a system built from repetition and memory, from countless unfinished departures. The signs weren't alive. They were interfaces translating something vast and patient into language I could process. They had been guiding me, yes, but only within the boundaries I had already accepted. The car doors locked with a soft, automatic click. Somewhere in the forest, something shifted, settling in. I sit here now with my hands on the wheel, waiting for the fog to finish closing the circle, watching the sign cycle through its quiet confirmations. It no longer tells me what's ahead. It only tells me where I am. And it is very clear about one thing. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be.